I also did not get that vaccine, and it was paperwork after paperwork of me not doing it. At the end of the day, that's also the kind of person that it takes. Like, you have balls and stand up when something doesn't seem right. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another Prepare for the Drop podcast. Today I have Brett. He just graduated from college and he's looking for some direction on what he should do when he gets into the Air Force, and we'll see how everything goes. He has a couple questions though. Brett, if you don't mind just introducing yourself a little bit and what you're going for in the Air Force and what you're kind of thinking.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm Brett. I'm 22 years old. I just graduated from Washington State University with a biochem degree, biochemistry. And I also played collegiate hockey over there. That was a lot of fun. I've been playing hockey my entire life. And I live in Alaska. I work as a microbiologist on the state of Alaska right now. So just training for that these past couple weeks. And yeah, I've been training near the end of my college education. I've been using the Be a PJ program. It's a great program. Recommend it for sure. Nice. I'm on the selection portion, so get selected. It's a 4.5 month program through Be a PJ as well. I am on the water portion right now, so I've been ramping up the training quite a bit. I have Guard Alaska unit tryouts May 16th and 17th, so those are coming up pretty soon. So I've been hitting the training pretty intensely, and those tryouts are for the PJ unit. And because I have a bachelor's degree, I've been really contemplating going back and forth, hearing things on both sides, pros and cons, of whether or not I should look at combat rescue officer instead, which, if anybody doesn't know, is just the officer version of PJ. So that's kind of what I'm going back and forth on. I don't want to go to tryouts to be a PJ and, just have that officer thing in the back of my mind. I don't want to be going in on my heels. So I really just want to ask a bunch of questions and figure it out.
Okay. So first thing, hockey in Alaska, real original. Just kidding. Have you done anything else in Alaska? Obviously you like the outdoors to some extent. You've been like ice climbing, or what kind of draws you in general to PJ, CRO, that kind of stuff?
Yeah. So, I like building igloos and riding on my polar bear to school too. So that's another thing. But no, I definitely like the outdoors. I've been hiking all my life. Wakeboarding, in the summer, go wakeboarding with my buddies on the lake. I enjoy swimming. I went to, I was in swim lessons when I was younger, so I just grew up swimming. I love it. I love it on the lake. I love.
Why'd you smile like that at thinking about swimming when you were younger? Is there some kind of story? Kind of story behind that?
I don't know. Maybe a cute swim instructor or something in the past. So.
Oh, okay.
Maybe I was thinking of that.
The good old Sandlot thing. You might not have watched that.
I also grew up running track, so I ran track. I tried football for a month, and I hated it. It was very boring to me compared to hockey. So one day I just walked off the field, and I never went back. Nice. So I love hiking and the outdoors. I've hiked the tallest mountain in the valley here in Alaska, in Palmer, Alaska, which is Pioneer Peak for anybody that knows that. I love snow machining too. I just love the outdoors in general. So awesome. The draw of my degree in pre-med biochemistry and combining the outdoor love and the physical action of the PJs and dealing with medicine just really drew my interest.
Yeah. And I think that was one of the best parts of the job, is that you get to do all the things that you just mentioned, get paid for it, and also do a bunch of other stuff on top of that. So every day is different and you're always going out and figuring out what kind of adventures you can get yourself into. And I think that was one of the most fun things about Pararescue in general. And I think something that people kind of overlook is the adventurous aspect that special operations and PJs have in general. Whenever I would go TDY somewhere, the first thing I would do is put on my running shoes and go with one of my buddies, or sometimes by myself, just run around the city and figure out what the people are doing around there, what kind of restaurants are there, and just get the lay of the land. And it was always really cool to just be in some random place and throw on my shoes and just go for a run. Obviously you got to be careful, I guess, or whatever nowadays. But, they see some kind of weird looking American running around most of the time, a little bit bigger than most of the other people there as far as strength, but they usually don't mess with you. You just got to have that don't mess with me look on your face whenever you're running through. But
A little
anyway,
grimace.
yeah, that little smile, come on, bring it in. So getting back to the whole CRO PJ thing, the biggest thing that I tell people to consider is, how old are you?
22.
22. So typically people who are younger in age, it's definitely more of a toss up because as a PJ, you'll get a little bit more training as far as being able to extricate patients. You're expected to be the hands-on guy. As a CRO, they teach you as a nice to know thing. Like if we don't have enough hands, you can help and get in there, but that's not your primary job. Your primary job is the up and out stuff and being able to communicate with assets and whoever you need to be talking to, the team leader, and coordinating the overall picture of what's going on the ground. Because at the end of the day, the officer is the person that is in charge of what's going on the ground if they're there. So they take that responsibility. But for a person who is older, I usually recommend, you got kids to take care of, or you're making a certain income. It's going to be a big drop in pay to go from making whatever income you're making. Hopefully it's, a decent income if you're 30 or whatever. But to go from doing that to being a senior airman is a big drop in pay. So especially when you're going through the pipeline, you get benefit or extra bonuses once you graduate for jump, dive, and a couple other things, but it's going to be a big pay. So besides that, it's what do you see yourself doing? The other aspect is if you get in and you're young and you go straight in for officer and you're planning on doing a career out of this thing, you can potentially make it to lieutenant colonel, or more. So it just depends on what your aspirations, your goals are. And you can obviously go into PJ and then 4 or 6 years later, but at that time you would have been almost a major if you had come in initially for officer and stuck with it. So do you like the straight up leadership as far as almost being like eventually the CEO of a company? Like that's basically what a squadron commander and group commander, wing commander is, just bigger companies. And then that obviously transfers to different opportunities than you would get if you were a PJ. Or do you want to just stay with like the bros and go and have fun out on the mountain, and which obviously is more enticing to you based on the way that you gave me that look. He's smiling because his video is not there. But, and that's kind of expected when you're 20 in your, young 20s. Whereas older guys have been in charge before and they're just like, yeah, I guess I got to keep with this. But those are some of those strong factors that I would recommend you consider on what you want to do. I mean, it sounds like just from your reaction, you would regret it if you didn't do PJ first.
Yeah,
But
I was going to ask you if you've had anybody that's went straight into CRO, especially when they're young, like let's say my age, and look at all you guys maybe having more fun and regretting his decision or being like, I wish I could do that. Or is it really just like, as an officer, he could be like, oh, that sounds cool. Let me go do that with you guys.
Yeah, some of both. It just depends on what the task load is for the squadron at the time, because when you become an officer, you're going to be in charge of a section. So you graduate from, the apprentice course for CRO school, and then you end up going to the unit and you can be in charge of whatever place. Some people were in charge of supply when they first were like a butter bar or like a first lieutenant whenever they got out of there. Some people were in charge of a team depending on if they had some other experience or, there was just not a spot to fill on a team because there was another person there already, and try to keep teams together. So you're going to be in charge of some kind of section running those things. And that's your primary duty for that time until you get to be around the team. Then you'll go and train with them, of course, because you have your own line items and checklists of things you got to do as far as upgrade is concerned. And then beyond that, if you have the time and you're still knocking everything out, you can go on everything with the teams as long as there's not something else to do. So, but as a PJ, you're on the team immediately. There's no reason for you to be going to supply unless you really messed up and kind of handcuffed yourself. I mean, like getting DUIs and that kind of thing is what I'm talking about. So when you're a PJ, you're brand new, like your job, like I said, is literally the hands-on everything. You should be all up on the patient, extricating all the ropes, everything. You should have your hands on and be actively engaged in the work. So that's what's expected is you're going to go on every TDY no matter what, or extra TDYs because you're new and you need to go and get all the experience that you can. So, you definitely get a lot more hands-on as far as that's concerned. Officers also have to do more reports, which none of this sounds sexy, but at the end of the day, if you are doing those, being prepped for CEO-like tasks as the, civilian equivalent, then you need to know the ins and outs of what you're in charge of, what you're responsible for, putting your signature on everything. You're doing like EPRs for people and helping out with that as one of the approving authorities on that. So writing and going to leadership type conferences. So, I mean, you learn obviously a lot of things and you have a lot of responsibility as a CRO. So I'm not trying to diminish any of that, but you definitely have less of the hands-on, and you'll still deploy also for at least a couple rotations so you can have that experience and go with the team. But it's going to come to an end after you've pretty much put on captain. You'll still deploy, but you won't be on the missions because there's other lieutenants that'll be there, and you'll be the person that's in charge of staying back at the operation center.
And so, from my understanding, you stuck with PJ the entire way, and you never went to PJ to CRO. And I was going to ask why you didn't go to CRO.
Well, I did 12 years as a PJ, and then I became a PA. So I'm a PA right now, but I'm not in the military, obviously. My hair, but I never really wanted to be a CRO, honestly. I guess maybe when I first started, I thought about it because a lot of the CROs were just studs whenever we got on team, and they were super chill, laid back. But eventually they have to put their higher ranking officer hat on and then not necessarily hang out as much with the boys or be a little bit more tailored in the way that they hang out with the guys, just because the officer enlisted relationship, fraternization and everything. So they can't have favorites or anything like that. But I really just enjoyed being one of the dudes and then eventually being the team leader. And I mean, you still, as a team leader, are doing a lot of the things that are about the same as what an officer would do, kind of. Obviously, you're not getting as much pay, but you're planning out a lot of the training and you're making sure all the guys get their upgrades, but you're also there just hands-on, like teaching them exactly what they need to be learning for their upgrade training. Whereas a CRO, that's, again, not their expertise. And they eventually will get their instructor, but when you're a team leader, you have to be an instructor and you have to be able to teach the guys and, run the team. So it was pretty cool to just be in that position. And that's, all I really wanted to do was be a team leader and deploy a couple times with the guys and be able to, feel like I was able to adequately train everyone that came onto the team and make them, the team environment. You mold the team how you want it to be.
So regarding the pay, you were talking about the bonuses and stuff, like you said, after the pipeline. So once you get those certifications. So is that like bump in pay? Not that you want to do the job just because of the money or whatever, but does that depend on like when you're deployed? So like you're getting this money only if you're deployed, or you're getting this money only if you're doing this certain mission, or you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah. So to be honest, it's changed a little bit because it used to be you get separate pays for each qualification that you have. So you got a separate jump pay, which at the time it was $225, and then you got a dive pay, which was $150 a month. And then they changed those individual pays to one special duty type pay. And I think whenever I left, it was somewhere around $800 to $1,000. I hope that it's gone up now. I don't know what it is right now off the top of my head, honestly. That's something that I'd have to look up. So don't quote me on what that is exactly going to be, but it's somewhere around that number, $700 to $1,000. And you'll get that every month. There were some times when you had to like jump to keep up currency or fly to keep up currency, like 4 hours a month in order to continue to get paid as that, flyer status. So again, I'm not sure exactly what that is right now, but you will get pay, which is obviously more than what a normal E4, 5, or 6 would get. And then you also get bonuses on top of that. And I don't know where the bonuses are right now either, but my first bonus that I got when I re-enlisted as I think I was an E5 at that time. It multiplies the number of years you're going in or re-enlisting for times your base pay. So I ended up getting like $90,000 for my first re-enlistment. It's probably more now, at least I hope it is, but I don't know off the top of my head.
That's pretty good. And just the first thing that sprang to my mind, this may be a little goofy, but so when you were saying that the officers initially, up until they reach captain, or they're kind of one with the boys, they're always training, they're kind of in that role more.
Mm-hmm.
But then once they put on captain, they kind of have to put on their more officer-like duties. Is there anybody that has tried to just kind of stay under the captain role? Is that frowned upon? Has anybody tried to do that so that they could stay at that level where it's more hands-on?
You pretty much can't do that. So unless you mess up terribly, which obviously you don't want to do that.
Yeah, you don't want to do that purposefully. Yeah.
Yeah. Captain is basically a guaranteed thing. So all you have to do is not mess up and then be in for long enough. It's kind of like senior airman. So it's difficult to stay in that position. And then, it also looks bad if you're a captain for a long time. And again, major is also one of those things that's kind of hard to not get. If you're performing well and you do your job well, then you're probably going to put on major unless you mess up. So a lot of that. And then lieutenant colonel, it gets a lot more competitive at that point. But at that point in time, once you're putting on lieutenant colonel, you're going for squadron group type of leadership position, depending on who you are and how fast you got there.
Mm-hmm. How common is it for guys like me that graduated college or have a degree under their belt, a bachelor's degree under their belt, or more, maybe even a master's, to go into enlist and become a PJ? So just like, how common is that?
I would say 22 years old is a pretty solid time to go in. 22, 23, like you're probably ahead of the curve as far as maturity. When I first came in, because I was 19 and I didn't know my head from my ass, I was just there. And I was just like, okay, who you are, Sergeant? I'll do whatever you tell me to do. Which, maybe it was the Forrest Gump thing. And I was just like, whatever you tell me to do, Sergeant, I'll do it. But I think that actually one of the recruiters told me there was a study that they did that people that had their degrees were more likely to graduate than people that didn't have their degrees. They didn't specifically delineate what the correlation was, but I can speculate that it's probably because people that have finished a degree have some amount of discipline and they're striving for, making themselves better in general. So
yeah, that makes sense.
I, don't know if that is exactly it, but that's, like you said, what makes the most sense to me. So you have a better chance, statistically speaking. I always get tripped up on statistically, but yeah. So I think overall, you would have a good shot if you went and with your background, all the things that you did, playing hockey your whole life and liking the outdoors, being an athletic person, and especially going through the program, the BPJ program. Obviously, it's not an easy program, but that's why I programmed it that way, is because I want people to just get that experience. Like, this is kind of a glimpse, especially the longer days, the crucibles, where you just go through a whole bunch of shit and it sucks at the end, but you're like, yeah, that was cool that I was able to do that, even though it took forever. And
yeah, definitely builds confidence day by day. It's definitely really good. I love it. I mean, it's really fun in the moment, sometimes, especially when I'm just doing everything by myself pretty much. I don't have many people. I have maybe one person I'm training with now that I just met in the pool. But
Nice.
yeah, it gets pretty, you get into that robot state where I'm just listening to music for so long, and then I get sick of all my music. Like I have probably like 8 different playlists that I go through because I'm just like, oh man. And then eventually I just take off my headphones. But in the end, I feel amazing. I get that euphoric feeling, when you just beat your body down.
Yeah, love it. That's awesome. But yeah, so you're doing a lot of stuff. I think that you would have a good shot. Especially, I mean, you'll get a real taste of it when you go to the tryouts here in a couple months and figure out what that's all about. I can imagine in Alaska, that's definitely one of the more sought after units because the terrain that's up there and the civilian missions that they get, but also they have just a solid crew of guys up there who are leading the squadron. And yeah, they've been there for, I don't know, a lot of them have been there for a very long time at the Alaska unit. So lots of experience there and lots of good dudes to help mentor younger guys.
Mm-hmm. So I'm guessing you know quite a bit of them, or have you ever?
I've never been up to the Alaska unit, but yeah, I know a couple of the guys that like we've crossed paths when we were on deployments or wherever we were, different trainings, paramedic refreshers. So you see each other, and some of them, I went through and dock with. So it's cool to have that community, and you guys just always kind of pass by each other. Maybe it's a year or maybe it's 5 years that have lapsed between the last time that you saw them. And it's just cool, that community in that way, because you never just forget any of the guys that you met because it's always in some kind of shitty place that you meet. And you always have good memories.
Oh yeah, I was gonna ask if you could kind of talk about maybe guard versus reserves, PJ and Crow. Like if there's a
So
big difference.
guard versus reserve, I am not a subject matter expert on that, but the biggest difference that I've heard is the funding and where that comes from. So obviously the guard guys are going to get, it's a national guard. So you get the money from that state. So it's funded by that. And so it depends on how they want to, send your guys out. Like Texas, we don't have a unit in Texas or anything, but just for example, they're sending their guard, I guess, down to the border. So the governor kind of has more authority to be able to mobilize those kind of units, depending on where you're at. And then the reserve guys, take from a different pool of funds. But honestly, beyond that, I don't know a lot else.
What about obviously you deploy when you're guard, like you still deploy. Can you talk about that a little bit, like guard deployments versus active duty deployments?
Yeah. So the guys that I know on the guard units, they have a primary job. I mean, both with guard and reserves, you're expected to have a primary job. You're not getting paid the normal amount unless you go active guard or reserve. Active guard or reserve means that you're like holding down the fort and keeping continuity at the unit while all the other guys are kind of coming and going and doing their thing. So you're just tracking what needs to be done and making sure that everything's taken care of. But if you're just a regular guard, part-time kind of guy, then there will be most of the time when guys that I know who have been in reserve guard, they say, hey, there's a training that's coming up. Let me know if you're able to make it. And, obviously it looks bad if you're just every single time, nope, not able to make it. I'm like, okay, what are you doing here? You got to do your minimum at least. And so there's a degree to which you are able to put into that unit. So, and it's the same thing for deployments as well. Obviously, they need to fill spots for leadership positions. So there has to be a CRO, a team leader, element leader. And then a lot of times there's also one-offs. So if, let's say, the Vegas team, or I guess the Vegas team is moving out now. So the Davis-Monthan, Arizona team is trying to deploy and they're, missing a person. So then you can augment them and deploy with that unit as whatever role you are in, like a PJ element leader or just a team member. So you have chances to augment, as well as there are also guys that have deployed with some of the Rangers. for a couple of different like recovery specialist positions, and all those opportunities. It just depends on who the commander is, what kind of relationships they keep up. A lot of people have just rotating contracts with other special operations branches to augment. So, and a lot of times the units kind of share those things because obviously each one wants their guys to have experience as well, and that's just part of the deal. So, a lot of different options there, but in general, you have some more ability to say, no, I have something really important going on.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not always guaranteed. So, just with a grain of salt kind of thing. Because if you're the only guy, then you're the only guy, and that's what needs to be taken care of.
And then, so I also want to talk about the difference between PJ versus CRO and being attached to certain units, because obviously like the PJ would have more opportunity to attach to certain units such as Rangers and SEALs and maybe like Green Berets, ODA teams. So maybe that versus combat rescue officer side, like do they get to integrate as much?
No, they don't. So the only other things that CROs really do that are like, I guess, extracurricular that PJs don't do is sometimes you'll need to do like a site survey in some kind of, I don't know, austere environment where you're thinking about sending your team and you need to just make sure that there's the assets and facilities available for, just deployment in general. So they'll go down with a really small team and just check it out and figure out what the logistics of doing all that would be, because, they're the main person that's going to be planning it. So that's primarily what the big extracurricular things, like I said, CROs have done. But honestly, I can't think of any CROs that have deployed like with them by themselves as a augmentee to like SEALs or Green Berets or anything. Every time we went, it was, me and a CCT guy or just me that would be augmenting. So yeah, I can't think of any. If you've heard of
That
anything,
fact alone is very enticing to me. That sounds very cool.
Yeah, just being able to integrate with different units.
Yeah. You're kind of. I mean, just the whole PJ route is definitely more enticing to me as we're having this
looking more and more like that's going to be. I mean, like I said, I already knew it by the smile you put on your face when I was explaining PJ versus CRO at first. So it's, it sounds like that's what you got to do. But
yeah,
other people are going to tell you, well, it's more financially responsible to go and be a CRO because then you'll be an officer and then you can do whatever. But at the end of the day, life is about the experience. You can always make money doing whatever other job that you want to do after you're done. Go be a freaking pro hockey player or something, or start a business training people how to play hockey. Whatever you want to do, the world is your oyster once you've just, instilled the confidence in yourself and you know that you can do pretty much anything, which is what you feel like after you're done with NDOC. Obviously, don't mean to be egotistical, but it's a good feeling. Just like whatever it is, I'll take care of it and I'll knock it out because that's what I want to do.
Yeah, that's awesome. So speaking of like different jobs and going on to different jobs, do you know much about being a guard PJ and potentially having or working towards your civilian career? And then what if that civilian career is overseas, but you still want to be a guard PJ? Let's say me being in Alaska and having a career opportunity overseas.
That would be something that you would have to work out with your commander. So the commander of the squadron is the person who accepts a certain amount of risk that's involved with you not being immediately deployable. And a lot of times they'll say, well, you just need to be able to be back here within like 6 hours or something like that. So in case there is a recall and the whole unit has to mobilize for whatever reason, World War III or something, then you need to be able to be there, obviously, because you're part of that unit and you've made that obligation clear. So that's really the biggest stipulation. It's kind of loose on what that means of 6 hours. Like you can hop on a flight versus driving distance. So again, it's up to the commander on what they expect out of you, and if you've been there for a long time, maybe they will make some more exceptions for whatever job that you may have eventually. And obviously, if it's as long as it's not in China or some on the other side of the world kind of place, which I don't know if that is, but I won't get into that. Microbiologist, as long as you're not working for the Wuhan lab.
What if I already am? The underground lab here in Alaska.
All right, forget it. You're not gonna do either one, PJ or Crow. You already make enough money. So yeah, that's just basically what it depends on, is what the commander is willing to accept as far as risk. So
okay, that makes sense. And what about PJ versus Crow family life? Is there a big difference there? Both of them are very demanding.
I can't really think of a big difference between those two, because you are still gone almost the same amount of time, maybe home a little bit more as a Crow, because you don't have as much offsite training to do, and a lot of it has to do with like leadership responsibilities and planning. So it just depends on the unit though, and how much they need you or need to use you for certain things, but maybe a little bit more home for Crow. So
what about PJ and Crow, like desk work? So I assume that there's more PJ desk work than I think.
Well, you're in the Air Force, so anybody in the Air Force has to do some amount of computer-based training, which you basically have OPSEC requirements and, just different trainings that everyone in the Air Force has to go through. But for the most part, the big things that you're going to be doing as far as desk work is going to be developing a PowerPoint to teach and let people know, like, you're going to be teaching land nav and all the different aspects of land nav, and telling us about how you use this compass and how you use a map to plot different points, and then what the different terms are for those things, each different type of geographic feature that you see on a map. So you're just going over little things like that because it's part of your upgrade training, so you just need to make PowerPoints for that. And at the end of the day, though, that is just prepping you to give speeches in front of whatever platforms you're going to be working with as far as like aircraft. You need to give briefs to the commanders on what our side is, what our duties are, what you plan on having your team do once you become like element leader, team leader. You're going to be giving all those briefs and doing all the planning for that. So a lot of that is good practice to just be able to be in front of people and, give out a brief. So, but for the most part, you're not necessarily doing a lot of typing up of stuff, depending on what your ancillary duty is. A lot of times you have, like, as a team member, one guy's in charge of the med equipment, one guy's in charge of the extrication equipment, one guy's in charge of whatever. So each person has their own little thing that they just need to keep track of as far as team gear, just so we know that it's organized and it's good to go. So not a ton, though, of computer work. You would usually just set aside like a Friday or maybe a Wednesday if it's a down day in between training to get all those little computer things knocked out. So it's not terrible, although it sucks when you're doing it, because obviously that's not why you joined to be a PJ, is sit in front of a computer.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's what I'm feeling like right now with my training as a microbiologist. It's very boring right now, but hopefully it's temporary.
Yeah, I don't know why. I mean, PJ to microbiologist, that seems like a pretty stark contrast of the things that you would be doing. And that's interesting that you even went for microbiology. Maybe that's making you or forcing you to like go PJ and go the opposite direction, because microbiologist is probably a sedentary job.
Yeah, so initially when I went to, this is kind of a side tangent, whatever, but when I joined college, I wanted to become a doctor. So I went through biochemistry pre-med. So, I mean, I could go to med school if I got all my prereqs in and MCAT, whatever. So originally I was doing that. I was really into medical aspect, and I actually went through ROTC in college for 3 years, and I was just really honed in on the doctor route. And then as time went on, that's when I got introduced to PJ or CRO. So for ROTC. So then that kind of just really consumed me, especially just loving like the team aspect with hockey all my life. I just love that atmosphere, the banter, everything like that, of the challenging each other, bettering each other. And so that just, like I said, it just consumed me. And I just was thinking about it right when I woke up, thinking about it right before I went to bed, training and going to school. So that's how I got introduced to that, basically, this whole career path. And then I left because of the mandates. So I left because of that. I stepped away, and I had my cadre tell me, we'll put a good word in if you want to go to officer candidate school later down the line if things settle down or whatever. So that's why I'm really, this whole thing I just had that another spark for it, especially with everything calming down. And I don't want to let anything get in my way of having amazing experiences and, the dream job that I was just so obsessed with for 3 years, and I'm becoming more obsessed with it now. So that's just a little tangent, but that's how I basically landed into this interest of wanting to go PJ.
And that's another thing that lines up with being a good candidate. Is that was what I was like when I was thinking about joining, and then I was like, okay, I'm this is all I can think about, is just same thing. Every time you wake up, before you go to bed, and every other second you have in between where there's a dull moment, you're thinking about it. And like, let me look at another video or whatever. And you're just checking out different things on the internet. You're like, okay, well, I mean, I got to do this. Like, this is everything that I'm thinking about right now. And then the other part is the whole mandate thing that you talked about. And I also did not get that vaccine. And it was paperwork after paperwork of me not doing it. At the end of the day, that's also the kind of person that it takes. Like, you have balls and stand up when something doesn't seem right. So it's something that obviously is a sensitive subject at some point. But at the end of the day, you can try and file a religious exemption or whatever, or you just don't have to get it. Nobody can force you to do anything that you don't want to do. So anyway, we can probably I could do a whole podcast on that. So,
I figured I was trying not to get into that whole rabbit hole, but that's yeah.
So anyway, for you guys that are out there listening, that, stick to whatever you believe in. That's all that it comes down to. And nobody can force you to do anything that you don't want to do. Maybe they'll give you some paperwork or whatever. At the end of the day, do what you think is right and stand with your head held high. That's all there is to it. Well, I think overall, hopefully this added a little bit of clarity to what you want to do and what you want your path to look like. We mostly talked about PJ versus CRO, guard versus being active duty. And it sounds like you're more set on being a PJ, which, if you want to be hands-on and you want to be with the boys, so to speak, for a longer period of time, then, PJ is the route that you want to go. CRO obviously has its benefits as well. If you are trying to join and you're younger, just know that you're going to have to be more mature and be able to speak in front of people and then do planning and all the things that are involved with being an officer. But at the end of the day, you're an officer, enlisted or unlisted, and you can't just necessarily be bros out in public. Just, there are rules, and some people can bend them depending on the team you're at. But at the end of the day, all it takes is one person. It's typically a support person to say, hey, I think that guy was hanging out with the other guy and he's an officer. And, they turn into super nerds. So anyway,
jealousy.
Yeah. So, hopefully, like I said, that answered a couple of your questions. And if you have any questions after, just feel free to hit me up. And if you guys listening have any questions or want to be on the podcast, hit me up, Brian at How to Be a PJ. Check out the programs that we were talking about. If you have any questions about any of that, again, hit me up. Otherwise, I appreciate y'all listening, and I'll see you next time. Later.